You know what most men get completely wrong about talking to women about sex? They think it's either something you whisper about in the dark after months of dating or something crude you joke about with the guys. But here's the truth. Nobody tells you. There's a precise way to have these conversations that doesn't just avoid awkwardness. It actually makes her more attracted to you, not less, more. And the men who figure this out early, they never struggle with connection, chemistry, or keeping that spark alive, whether it's been 10 days or 10 years. The rest? They're stuck in relationships where the passion faded months ago, and they have no idea why. So if you've ever felt like talking about intimacy might ruin the mood, or if you've watched attraction slowly drain from a relationship without knowing how to bring it back, pay attention, because what I'm about to share changes everything. Let's start with something most people won't admit. Sexual compatibility isn't something that just happens. It's not magic. It's not luck. And it definitely doesn't fix itself over time. In fact, waiting and hoping things will naturally align is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Think about it. You meet someone, there's attraction, things move forward, and somewhere along the way, you both just assume you're on the same page about intimacy. But months or even years later, you realize you've been speaking completely different languages. One person wants more adventure, the other wants more emotional connection. One feels neglected, the other feels pressured. And because nobody ever learned how to talk about this stuff properly, it all just builds up into resentment and distance. Here's what's interesting though. When you actually know how to discuss sex and intimacy in a mature, respectful way, something counterintuitive happens. Instead of pushing her away or making things weird, she actually feels safer with you, more connected, more attracted, because confidence in communication is incredibly rare. And when a woman meets a man who can navigate these topics without being crude, nervous, or pushy, it stands out. It signals emotional maturity. It signals that you're someone who can handle real intimacy, not just physical attraction. And that's the difference between relationships that fizzle out and ones that keep getting better. Now, most men fall into one of two categories when it comes to this. Either they avoid the topic entirely, treating it like some forbidden subject that'll ruin everything if they bring it up too soon, or they go the opposite direction and bring it up so bluntly that it feels uncomfortable or transactional. Neither approach works. The first one leaves you guessing for months, building a relationship on assumptions that might be completely wrong. The second one creates tension and makes her put up walls. What you need is a middle path, a way to open these conversations that feels natural, respectful, and actually builds attraction instead of killing it. So let me give you two specific techniques that work regardless of where you are in a relationship. Whether you're just starting to date someone, you've been together for a while, or you're married and trying to reignite something that's been lost. These aren't pickup lines or manipulation tactics. They're genuine communication strategies that create space for honest connection. The first technique is something you can think of as indirect exploration, and it works because it takes all the pressure off. When you're out together, maybe at a cafe, walking through a park, or watching a movie, you can turn your surroundings into a conversation starter. People watching becomes a playful way to talk about relationships without making it feel like an interrogation. You might see a couple at another table and casually say something like, "Those two look like they've been together forever," or, "I bet they just met tonight." It's light. It's observational. There's no risk. because you're not talking about yourselves directly. What makes this powerful is that it gives you both a comfortable way to share perspectives on relationships and attraction without the spotlight being directly on either of you. She can respond freely because there's no pressure. She might laugh and say, "No way, they definitely just started dating. Look how nervous he is." Or she might say, "I think they've been together a while. You can tell by how comfortable they are." Either way, you're learning how she thinks about relationships, what she notices, what matters to her. Once that conversation is flowing and she's engaged, you can gradually introduce something a little more personal, but still indirect. You might say something like, "I wonder what their dynamic is like. Who do you think takes the lead between them?" See what just happened there? You've introduced the idea of relationship dynamics, roles, attraction, and sexual energy. But it still doesn't feel invasive because you're technically still talking about other people. Her response tells you everything you need to know. If she leans in, gets curious, starts exploring the idea with you, that's a clear sign she's comfortable discussing these topics. If she changes the subject or seems disinterested, that tells you it's too soon, and that's valuable information too. You're not forcing anything. You're just creating openings and paying attention to how she responds. The beauty of this approach is that it never feels like you're pushing an agenda. You're not trying to get somewhere specific. You're just having a conversation that naturally touches on topics related to attraction, connection, and intimacy. And because it's playful and observational, it bypasses all the defensiveness that usually comes up when people talk about sex directly. She doesn't feel like you're trying to get something from her. She feels like you're someone who thinks about these things in an interesting, mature way. And that's attractive. Now, the second technique is more direct, but still incredibly safe. And it works especially well if you want the conversation to feel intellectual and thoughtful, rather than playful. This is where you bring up something you've read, watched, or heard that relates to relationships or intimacy. But you frame it as an interesting idea, not as a personal confession or request. For example, you might say, "I read something recently about how most couples never actually talk about what turns them on because they're afraid of being judged. Do you think that's true?" What makes this work is that you're inviting her perspective on a concept, not asking for personal details. There's no pressure. You're not saying, "So what turns you on?" which would feel invasive and put her on the spot. Instead, you're asking what she thinks about an idea, and that creates psychological safety. She can engage with the topic without feeling like she's revealing too much too soon. And if she's comfortable, the conversation will naturally go deeper. She might say, "Yes, I think that's true. People are scared of being vulnerable." And then you can respond with something like, "That makes sense. It's interesting how something that should bring people closer actually becomes a source of anxiety." From there, the conversation can evolve organically. You're not interrogating. You're exploring together. And that shared exploration builds connection, because you're both being thoughtful and honest without any agenda. If she responds with curiosity and openness, you know she's someone who values emotional intimacy and mature communication. If she avoids the topic or seems uncomfortable, that's fine too. It just means deeper conversations need more time and trust. And you've learned something important without creating any awkwardness. What both of these techniques have in common is that they remove performance pressure from the equation. Most men think talking about sex has to be this high-stakes thing, where one wrong move ruins everything. But when you approach it as exploration rather than negotiation, when you make it about curiosity and understanding rather than trying to get somewhere, the whole dynamic changes. You're not performing. You're not trying to impress. You're just being someone who's genuinely interested in understanding connection and compatibility. And that authenticity is what creates real attraction. From a woman's perspective, and this is something a lot of men don't realize, when a guy can talk about sex without being crude, awkward, or overly eager, it's incredibly attractive. It shows confidence. It shows emotional intelligence. It shows that he's someone who can handle intimacy in all its forms, not just the physical part. Because here's what women are actually looking for. They want to feel safe enough to be open. They want to know that if they share what they really want, what they're curious about, what matters to them, they won't be judged or dismissed. When you create that space, through how you communicate, you're doing something most men never figure out. You're building trust and desire at the same time. The goal here isn't just to talk about sex for the sake of talking about it. The goal is to create a relationship where both people can be completely honest about what they enjoy, what they're curious about, what makes intimacy fulfilling for them. That's what real compatibility looks like. It's not about finding someone who magically wants exactly what you want without ever discussing it. It's about finding someone you can actually talk to, someone who appreciates your honesty and openness, someone who makes you feel safe being vulnerable. And when you find that, when you build that, the physical connection stays alive because it's rooted in genuine understanding and ongoing communication. Here's something else that's important to understand. The wrong person will make you feel judged or anxious for being open. The right person will appreciate your curiosity, your respect, and your willingness to communicate. That difference matters more than almost anything else when it comes to long-term relationship satisfaction. You can have incredible physical chemistry with someone, but if you can't talk openly about what you both want and need, that chemistry will eventually fade. On the other hand, when you can communicate freely, when you've built that foundation of trust and honesty, desire actually deepens over time instead of diminishing. Think about the relationships you've seen that lasted decades and still had that spark. It's not because those people got lucky and happened to be perfectly compatible. It's because they figured out how to keep communicating, how to stay curious about each other, how to create space for honesty and vulnerability. They didn't let assumptions build up. They didn't let resentment fester. They talked about the hard stuff, the awkward stuff, the stuff most people avoid. And because they did that, they stayed connected in ways that most relationships never achieve. So when you're using these techniques, remember that you're not just trying to have one conversation about sex. You're building a pattern of communication that'll serve your relationship for years. You're showing that you're someone who values understanding over assumptions, connection over convenience, honesty over avoidance. And every time you do that, every time you create space for real conversation, you're investing in something that most people never build. You're creating the kind of relationship where both people feel seen, understood, and desired, not just in the beginning when everything's exciting and new, but years down the line when most couples are just going through the motions. The key is consistency. One conversation won't fix everything or reveal everything, but when you make this kind of communication a regular part of how you interact, when checking in and exploring together becomes natural rather than forced, that's when relationships transform. That's when you stop wondering if you're compatible and start knowing. That's when intimacy becomes something that brings you closer, instead of something that creates anxiety or distance. And here's the thing about sexual compatibility that nobody talks about. It's not static. What someone wants at 25 might be different from what they want at 35 or 45. Life changes people. Experiences shape desires. Stress affects libido. Bodies change. If you're not communicating throughout all of that, if you're just assuming things will stay the same, you're setting yourself up for disconnection. But when you've established that foundation of open communication early on, when both people know they can talk about what's changing for them without judgment, you can navigate all of that together. You can adapt. You can grow. You can keep discovering each other instead of growing apart. So start practicing these techniques now, wherever you are in your relationship journey. If you're single and dating, use them to understand compatibility early. If you're in a relationship that's lost some of its spark, use them to rebuild connection. If you're in a good relationship that you want to keep strong, use them to deepen what you already have. The specific context doesn't matter as much as the principle. Create space for honest communication about intimacy. Make it safe and judgment-free. And watch how it transforms, not just your sex life, but your entire relationship. Because at the end of the day, great relationships aren't built on perfect compatibility. They're built on the willingness to keep talking, keep exploring, and keep choosing each other with full understanding of who you both really are. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Sonnet 5.5